Greetings and welcome back to room 303 in our Talks with Walt, as we are calling our readings through the deathbed edition of Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass. We turn now to a little poem that's actually been anthologized often and has certainly been referenced very regularly. Has never come to thee an hour. This is poem number 24 of the 29 of By the Roadside. So obviously we're coming to the end of By the Roadside. Really, this is a fascinating little poem because it's a poem that was written in Whitman's old age, and in fact it was one of the last poems that he wrote, and he tinkered with it quite a bit. Now our assumptions are that you've been following our stuff at learnstrong.net. Down that left hand side, Talks with Walt, we call our playlist, and that from the very beginning with inscriptions you've been studying, annotating your own copy, I hope, of Leaves of Grass. We did give an introductory set of comments to Roadside, and then we just finished with Gliding. Now Norton's will tell us about this poem. It was a new poem of the 81 edition. And in fact, manuscripts like the Barrett will show two separate drafts on a single leaf with much revision. Now, I love that maybe the greatest of all scholars, Gay Wilson Allen, has said that By the Roadside are a collection of poems that really simply show the experiences of and poetic inspirations along Whitman's, quote, highway of life. I love the way that he says that. And really, this is a great poem about inspiration. And it runs like this. Has never come to thee an hour, a sudden gleam divine, precipitating, bursting all these bubbles, fashions, wealth, these eager business aims, books, politics, art, amours, to utter nothingness? Now, we read Whitman's Leaves of Grass for so many reasons, and again we talk about those 5 P's of Whitman, and here we're going to concentrate on Whitman as poet. And I think Whitman learned a lot from his study of Percy Bysshe Shelley and defensive poetry, and we've commented elsewhere at learnstrong.net about the importance of that little document, that little essay, poetic essay on poetry and poetry writing and inspiration. Where does inspiration come from? I think by the end of his life, Whitman was as enamored of this question as he was at the very beginning, when he was writing these poems and publishing the early poems. Notice he'll begin with asking 2 questions. So notice this is kind of 2 rhetorical questions, and that it's nicely balanced. Has never come to thee an hour. Of course, here by hour he just means moment, right, of insight. And then he uses the word sudden, which by the way gets used several times in Leaves of Grass, but 3 times in By the Roadside. I think this idea of sudden is like, wow, it just kind of happens. You're like, whoa, there it is. A sudden gleam, you'll maybe remember the word gleam from Year of Meteors. And then the word divine, you'll remember this one from, again, the very, very opening poem itself, where at the very opening, the very first poem of Leaves of Grass, he loves to use this word divine. You'll remember he says it, of life immense, in passion, pulse, and power, cheerful for freest action formed under the laws divine, the modern man I sing. So this idea of a divine gleam. Now, the word gleam is a central idea in all of Leaves of Grass. Something that shines through, the light that shines through. Immediately makes us think, of course, of Plato's Republic and Book 7 in the cave allegory and all of that. Perspicacity, right, we would say. A sudden gleam divine, precipitating, bursting all these bubbles, fashions, wealth. In other words, something that takes us beyond all of that, the silliness, the fashions, the wealth, fame and ambition would be a way to say it, right, and all of that. That's the first question, these eager business aims. Early on, Whitman did have a hope that Leaves of Grass would make him enough money so that he could be comfortable. Sadly, it never really happened until the very end, and by the very end, Whitman's health was so bad that he couldn't enjoy any amount of money that he had, for example, to be able to travel and the like. So notice here it's eager business aims, then the dash. We've seen it several times in By the Roadside, especially with these short poems, the dash. And then he'll give it books, politics, art, amours could all be somehow just shattered, busted up to utter nothingness. And it's fascinating that the word nothingness gets used 1 time in all of Leaves of Grass, and it's in this very moment itself. I find that a fascinating reality. Now, the idea of the hour, you'll maybe remember in Eidolons, right at the very beginning when he talked about the puzzling hour. And I think that Whitman himself was puzzled by this question all the way through his creative life. I think at 2A then we could probably argue that this poem is suggesting that inspiration is an enigma. As we have said elsewhere in lectures on learning itself, why is it that all of a sudden after so much work we can have this thing we call learning that happens? It's quite a remarkable thing. Of course, art in the end for Whitman can't be about fame, it can't be about fortune, although, you know, for him he thought about it. And this will take us obviously to Keats's When I Have Fears That I May Cease to Be. Then on, he will say it, at the moment when he realizes he's going to die and he's done with it, then he'll step to the shore of the wide world and he'll recognize that love and fame to nothingness do sink. I think that that word nothingness, that Whitman learned it from that poem of Keats, and we've given a full exegesis of that poem at learnstrong.net. At 2B, I love the direct rhetorical questions that are a part of this. Have you ever noticed, he says, has there never come a moment when you're just kind of blown away by the fact of inspiration? Now, at 3A, I have told you guys before that I think that you have to know Whitman to be able to read T.S. Eliot. Do you remember this from East Coker 5? And we've given full lectures on this at learnstrong.net. He says, so here I am in the middle way, having had 20 years largely wasted, the years of l'entre de guerre, trying to learn to use words, and every attempt is a wholly new start and a different kind of failure, because one has only learned to get the better of words for the thing one no longer has to say, or the way in which one is no longer disposed to say it. And so each venture is a new beginning, arrayed on the inarticulate with shabby equipment, always deteriorating in the general mess of imprecision of feelings, undisciplined squads of emotion. It's I think, a compelling way to read this poem, that what Whitman resurrects as the question about inspiration is one that will haunt, I think, so many great writers. And finally, at 3B, to help us maybe relate or understand or relate to this poem in some way, can you explain inspiration and where it comes from? And what about the great writers who will say things like, I don't write because I know what I want to say, I write to discover what it is I have to say. I like, as Flannery O'Connor says it best, quote, I write because I don't know what I think until I read what I say. What an amazing idea. I hope that as artists you will find this little poem a challenging one as you move through your creative life. Thank you.